This is the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, presented by thehoosier.com. Before we jump into this video, pause it right now and go subscribe to the Hoosier.com website, now a part of On3 Sports, for exclusive content covering the Indiana Hoosiers, including exclusive interviews, live recruiting updates, and much more. Make sure to join our community. We really appreciate it.
And Hoosier Nation, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button here on our YouTube page. We got plenty of more content on here, including more talking about the Hoosiers podcast episodes, recruiting highlights, press conferences, and much, much more. It literally takes 2 seconds. Just do it right now, get it over with, and then go on and let's enjoy this new episode.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to episode 51 of the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, presented by The Hoosier. I'm joined by Kyler Staley and Zach Browning. I'm Drew Rosenberg. Big show today as the Hoosiers are back in Bloomington after the team's trip to Puerto Rico. Indiana went 3-0 on the trip, including one win over a Puerto Rico all-star team and 2 wins over a Serbian professional team. Kyler, Zach, we're just going to jump right into it. Guys, what I guess initial takeaways, Kyler, from the trip to Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's kind of went as I expected. There were some good things that they showed. There were some bad things that they showed, but this team's obviously brand new, and we all are aware of that. It's a brand new team, nobody from last year, brand new coaching staff, and it's just basically, they went out there and they played against teams that they normally don't face. That first game that they played was basically a D3 school, so they obviously took care of business there. And then they showed some good and negative things when it comes to the last 2 games that they played. So, but yeah, I mean, it went overall as I expected. The main thing is just getting these guys together, playing on the floor and then bonding off the floor was the big thing. So, but obviously you can't take too much away from there, but there's obviously some good enough things to talk about.
Yeah, I agree with Kyler right there. There's some things that, didn't go to plan. Obviously, getting down by 20-plus points in the first half of both of those games against Mega Super Bet, probably not ideal for that team. But then, you saw the fight back, the resilience to be able to get back into those games, some closing moments, specifically from a guy like Lamar Wilkerson in that game 3. You saw a lot of good things, saw a lot of 3-point shots, maybe not as many go in as maybe you would have liked. The percentage wasn't necessarily there, but the volume was there, kind of the process itself was there from a stylistic standpoint, both offensively and defensively. And of course, you saw them bond off the court. If you were following Indiana basketball on social media at all that week, you saw them, whether it was jellyfish hunting or snorkeling or whatever it was, they were bonding off the court, which is typically what those kind of foreign trips are kind of more important for, is that bonding off the court, which kind of translates then to on the court. But I think overall, just a productive week for Indiana down there in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I mean, the off-court stuff's really important. Most of this team hasn't played with anyone on the roster, so it's, entirely brand new roster. You have Connor Enright, Tucker DeVries who've played with each other, but for the most part, completely new team. So building that chemistry on a trip like this is huge. But let's just jump right into the positive takeaways from the trip. Kyler, I'm going to start with you. What was your, biggest positive you saw from Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so I think the big one for me was this team knows how to come together when they're facing adversity, right? And Zach kind of mentioned it a little bit when they played Mega Super Bet. In both games that they played, games 2 and 3, they were down by like 20-plus points. I think the last game was like 22 points, and the game before that was like 24. And then they had big deficits, going into halftime as well. But with that, this team easily could have, it's a brand new team. Those guys are not used to really playing together, as much as what most teams are, right, by this point in time. But those guys could have easily folded. DeVries could have been like, hey, it is what it is, guys. Let's just finish this game out, blah, blah, blah. But no, these guys really came together. And I think Coach DeVries even talked about it too. Like, he obviously had to do some coaching at halftime and stuff, but these guys are very talkative with each other, saying things that they need to do on the floor and stuff, and just really communicating. And I think that's the big thing. Yes, it's not good, to obviously, start off as bad as what they did, but for them to, show that, like, hey, this is adversity against a pro team, right? A team that's got a bunch of pros on there and a bunch of high Division I prospects, right? So those guys were able just to figure out ways and find out ways to win. And I think that's the big thing. They went on that insane run. What was it, like 70-19, something like that? in the second game, and then obviously had a big run as well in the third game. But I think the big thing for me is this team's not going to back down. They're going to be tough. They're going to be guys that really play hard. They're going to play until the final whistle. And if there is adversity, they may not be the most talented team on the floor, but they're at least going to fight as much as they can to get back into a game.
Yeah, resiliency. I mean, you said finding ways to win. I think when you looked at last year's Indiana basketball team, they found ways to lose games, and there was a lot of games you could look at like, oh, if, that went another way. If they get a stop here, they can get a good possession here, they win those games. This was you're down 20 points in both games. Indiana found a way to, grind back into that and come out with a victory, including, a big stop from Lamar Wilkerson and an assist for him on the winning bucket. So just really big things right there. Zach, what's kind of your initial biggest positive from the game? Zach, you with us?
Am I back? Back?
You're back.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Zach is back. He's spaced out.
Internet.
All right, Zach.
I've had some issues.
Yeah, while I have you, what biggest positive from the trip?
Yeah, mine is going to be about Lamar Wilkerson. I know we talked about on last week's podcast kind of the search for an alpha on this team when we kind of discussed how there is probably multiple alphas, but I think we figured out who the number one alpha, the top dog, the alpha amongst the alphas is in Puerto Rico. And for this Indiana team, Wilkerson, or at least that's what it's looking like so far through obviously just exhibition games in August. So as much as but Lamar Wilkerson, he showed up when it mattered most against the 2 games against Mega Superbet, 18 points, 17 points in both of those contests. But what really stood out to me was that game 3 down the stretch, last offensive possession for Indiana. Who had the ball in their hands? It wasn't Tatum Conaway, the point guard. It wasn't Tucker DeVries. It was Lamar Wilkerson that had the ball in his hands. He was able to get to the basket, and he didn't even score. And I think that's the point that I want to make is that's the sign to me of a true alpha late in a game when Lamar Wilkerson is able to drive that ball to the basket. He's not necessarily thinking me. He's not thinking score in that kind of situation. He's driving to the basket and dumps it off to his teammate to get the go-ahead bucket. He got that go-ahead assist in that game 3 in that second rematch against Mega Superbet. And then on the other end of the floor, he comes down and gets the final defensive stop of the game. So I think in that game especially, but over the course of the week, when it was a dire situation, Indiana's down by 20 plus, so they need a big second half performance from somebody, or they need a big stop or a big assist or something down the stretch late in one of those games, Indiana turned to Lamar Wilkerson, and I think that kind of showcases that he is the alpha of the alphas, so to speak, for this Indiana team.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar Wilkerson, the shooting numbers probably weren't as, high as he would have preferred. And, the percentages weren't, too pretty. But again, you can see the vision. You can see he's going to be the guy on this team when Indiana needs a bucket, needs somewhere to go to. He's going to be that guy. I think for me, though, the biggest positive was not just the shot appetite. We saw a ton of threes taken, which, something we haven't seen from Indiana, but also some of the sets. I know you couldn't really watch the game, but from the clips, we saw some really good half-court play designs, and then also the speed Indiana was playing with. You've taken Conaway, Connor Enright, 2 guys pushing the floor, looking to get shooters. There was the viral clip of Enright slipping where it ended up with Lamar Wilkerson 3 after a quick pass back. Those are the things we want to see from Indiana that we haven't seen, in recent history. So that's going to be really big moving forward. But especially, more threes. The percentages weren't as good as, many hoped they would be. And it's 3 games in Puerto Rico in August. So I'm not really too concerned with the 3-point percentages at this point yet. But it's the fact they're taking them. They're taking good threes too. And that's something that we have not seen from Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's just – first of all, you guys both had really good points there and stuff. But yeah, the pace of play is just night and day from what we've seen. And I think I mentioned this on last podcast, or it might have been John's show that I mentioned this. But, obviously, Mike Woodson was always big on I want to play fast. And then you just wouldn't see it. And I thought it was very respectable. With DeVries, he said all off season, it's I want to play a certain way. I want to play fast. That's what I want to do. And that's exactly what he showed. And then on Lamar Wilkerson, just wanted to add a quick point. He's going to get his shots, right? He's always going to be a guy that's going to get his shots, and Coach DeVries is going to want him to get his shots. But, along with Zach, it did impress me how unselfish he is at times. And he's a guy that's willing to go out there and make a play, not only for himself, but for his teammates. Obviously he was he caused that winning play down the stretch, that dish off to Reed Bailey for them to win that last game. So overall, really, really impressed with the style of play and Lamar Wilkerson being that alpha that we kind of wanted him to be.
And I wanted to go back real quick, point on the shooting. And yes, the percentages were bad, or maybe not bad, but not as good as Indiana probably would have hoped for. And you hope when the regular season rolls around in November that those percentages are a little bit higher. But I think it's important to remember it was a FIBA ball, so it wasn't the full size ball. It was a little bit odd. The FIBA ball, it gets a bad rap, especially from a lot of high level basketball players, whether that's high major Division I guys, whether it's the professionals when they go overseas and play in the Olympics or whatnot. The FIBA basketball, it has a bad rap probably for a reason. It's a smaller ball. It's not easy necessarily to kind of adjust and shoot with that. I'm not sure Indiana had much practice time with that FIBA basketball. And also, whether you want to say it impacted them or not, or whether they would admit it impacted them or not, when you're around the ocean and you're swimming and you're playing beach volleyball all day, your legs, your arms might get a little bit shot. I mean, we've all been there. We've all gone to the pool and then not really been able to move our bodies afterwards if we try and go to the gym or something like that. So I think that probably had a little bit of an effect too. I doubt they'd probably want to admit that just because, they're high major Division I basketball players in the Big Ten. But I do think you have to take the shooting again. It's only 3 games. It's only August, different basketball. It was a busy, physically active week for the guys. So I think we have to take the shooting percentages with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing. It's August. It's we're talking about positives. We're going to talk about negatives in just a second. But again, it's August. I think the important things you mentioned. Having an alpha like Lamar Wilkerson, someone Indiana can go to. The 3-point percentage, like playing fast, like those are things that not 3-point percentage, but the amount of shots that are threes. Those are things that are going to translate into the season. That's the big thing. All right, well, there was a lot to like. There was also some things, maybe not full negatives, but some things, we want to see. We're monitoring, heading into the season. Zach, I'm going to start with you. I don't want to say the word negative, but I guess that's the only real word. What are some negatives you kind of taken away from the Puerto Rico trip?
Yeah, as you mentioned, there's nothing really that's blaring or jumping off the page at me like this needs to get fixed pronto within, the first week of being back. But I'd say if I had to choose one thing to kind of nitpick, it'd be the foul trouble. And I know that the officiating was what it was down there in Puerto Rico. There was some that were there in attendance that necessarily didn't agree with the officiating from kind of just an objective standpoint. Some of the fouls maybe a little tight, then maybe not so tight in some other instances throughout the course of pretty much each and every game. But I think the foul trouble kind of is a slight concern to me. You've got to, in the Big Ten, play defense without fouling. You can't allow a team into the bonus in the first 5, 6, 7 minutes of a half. So when you look at kind of the numbers and some of the numbers from the week in Puerto Rico, Josiah Miles picked, and again, they played with 6 fouls or 5 fouls too, which is weird because they were playing FIBA rules, but only had 5 fouls. That's besides the point. But Josiah Miles fouled out in one of the games. Connor Enright fouled out in a couple of games. So yes, you want to see the defensive aggression, and a guy like Connor Enright, he's always going to bring that defensive aggression, and that's exactly what you want to see from him. But you have to be able to tone it back a little bit when the game calls for it. If you're Darren DeVries in a situation where you have Connor Enright pick up his second foul at the 12-minute mark of the first half in a big-time Big Ten contest, you have to be able to trust him that he's not going to be able to pick up another foul if you leave him in that basketball game. So I think fouls aside and the numbers aside and the fact that these guys did foul, you have to be able to earn a little bit more trust from your coach that if you are playing in foul trouble, you're going to be able to play through that and be able to play without fouling if you need to, because that's what will matter. That's what will matter. Obviously, it doesn't really matter if you foul out in a game in August in an exhibition. That isn't really going to impact much either way. But if you can show your coach that he can trust you, if you can show Coach DeVries that he can trust you in a situation where it's late in the second half of a Big Ten game on the road against Purdue, you're playing in foul trouble, he has to be able to trust you that you can play defense without fouling in those types of situations. And I think if there was one thing to nitpick, for me, it was the foul trouble.
Yeah, I mean, it's, hard not to notice. Obviously, we weren't in Puerto Rico, so it's, could have been some judgment calls, could have been some, touch fouls that, might not get called in the Big Ten play. But definitely, again, as you mentioned, it's something to monitor moving forward. Kyler, I guess if you have anything to add on that, go for it. But otherwise, biggest negative or what you're monitoring moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think Zach and you, obviously, you covered it pretty well and stuff. So I'll just kind of jump into my negative. I'm kind of bouncing between 1 and 2 right now. I think I'll kind of go. I talked about this team being able to fight, when adversity shows its face and stuff like that. But I'm going to go on the other side on there, kind of play devil's advocate a little bit on this. It's just not starting off hot. And I kind of touched on it a little bit and stuff. But, those first two games, Indiana just was out. Physically, that Mega Super Bet team just really took it to them, really showed their dominance and stuff. For this Indiana team, and I mentioned it earlier, they're not going to be the most talented team in a lot of games that they play this season, right? Especially when they go to Kentucky or they play Louisville, Marquette, even maybe, and then you get into the Big Ten. They're just, as far as a talent standpoint, this team just doesn't jump out, on paper and stuff. So for them, I don't think that they can really afford to have really slow starts. And we've seen that with past Indiana teams. The past 2 years really come to mind. A lot of slow starts, obviously really, really hurt Indiana. A lot of slow starts at home even hurt Indiana and just hurt them in a way that they just were not built to come back. Now, this team probably is built better than the past two teams to come back and stuff. I think they'll be coached better. A system will be ran better for them to be able to, make a comeback and show toughness and stuff. But at the same time, if they're going up against a very, very talented team, there's going to be much more talented teams in the Big Ten, in the non-conference than what they face, with Mega Super Bet. If they go down by a lot of points or whatever and have slow starts and draggy starts, it could be danger zone for Indiana. Even though they could show some toughness and some fight, they just may not have that talent to be able to, go with that comeback, most of the time. So that's a little worrisome. Obviously, it's I agree with Zach. It's kind of hard to really say that there's a super negative or whatever and stuff. That's just nothing that this team can't fix. I think they can fix a lot of the negatives that we're talking about with this team, but in my opinion, they just need to learn how to start a little bit better right now.
Yeah, it's two sides of the same coin. They were really good down the stretch, fighting back into those games, but those starts, it's definitely a concern. You can't, go down 20 every single game and expect to come back. That's just not something that's realistic. And India's going to have to start better. It's a fact. Obviously, again, it's 2 games in August against, a professional team in Puerto Rico. So it's not something you're like, oh, this is a huge problem right now, sound the alarms. But if, first month of the season, first 2 months, Indiana find themselves starting off slow, then it's like, all right, this is something that's kind of translated from this preseason. Zach, you have anything to add on that?
I think it's interesting because even in the game against the Puerto Rican All-Stars, they kind of started out slow. It took until around halfway through the second quarter, if memory serves me right, for Indiana to really start to separate and kind of pull away there. And it's interesting. I wonder, is it maybe a starting lineup thing? Is it maybe there are certain guys off the bench that just kind of add an energy? I mean, the starting lineup and the closing lineups are relatively the same. Obviously, there was some foul trouble and some foul out issues that kind of prohibited that a little bit. Is it a mindset thing? It's interesting, but I think it's something that can be ironed out relatively easily.
Unfortunately, real quickly on my end, we won't find out if it's a starting lineup thing until you get, at least halfway through the season. Because if they have consistently slow starts, we even saw it with Mike Woodson a lot of times in his 4 years and stuff. He would change up the starting lineup, and he would mention it post game and stuff. He's like, I changed the starting lineup because we're not, starting off better, in games itself. Unfortunately, it could be a starting lineup thing. And that's not the those shade on any player right now and stuff. It is August, so everything that we say is with a grain of salt. But if it is a starting lineup thing, we probably won't know that until they at least play like 10 or so games, I would say.
Yeah, and they fought back. They won these games. We're nitpicking in August. Yeah. It's it's so long to go from now. So again, it's just something we're kind of watching for as we head into the season. My thing, it's the same exact thing. I'm not sounding the alarm. It's not it's not the end of the world, but it's turnovers. Indiana, I think, want to say they averaged 15 a game over the 3, which would have been towards the bottom of the country last season. So that's definitely something, I am watching. Darren DeVries talked about winning the turnover battle and, taking advantage of opponent turnovers. And if Indiana's turned the ball over, you're going to turn it over when you play fast. That's just part of that. Like, that's going to happen. But 15, it's a big number. Obviously this team's still building chemistry. So that's, to be expected. As you build chemistry, you're learning where guys like the ball, where they like to catch it, who's going to cut when and where. So again, it's just something I'm monitoring moving forward. It's not like end of the world right now, but 15, it's a sizable number.
Yeah, it is.
I think
If you're gonna play, sorry Zach, I'll say one quick thing, but if you're gonna play fast, you better take care of the ball. That's the only thing with that. You can't play fast and you can't turn the ball over, every other time up and down the floor. It just won't work, and you won't win very many games that way.
Kyler hit it right on the head. That's exactly what I was going to say. If you're going to play fast, if you want to play fast, you're going to play with 3, 4, 5 ball handlers on the floor. You have to be sure that you can trust each and every guy on the floor to bring that ball up. Can Reed Bailey really bring it up in the Big Ten when you get to that kind of level? He's really the only one that would stand out to me. Guys like Sam Alexis, Reed Bailey, do you trust them to bring the ball to the floor themselves, or do they need to be hitting it ahead to a guard? Those are the types of things that you figure out in August, and you figure out kind of this time of the season, and then you get that kind of ironed out before you head into the actual regular season.
Yeah, and Kyler, before we move on, did we mention the other kind of thing you wanted to talk about, or do you still have that?
As far as the negatives, or
yes,
the things that I had, well, we definitely did touch on it. We didn't necessarily say it, but inconsistency a little bit, and that's obviously a very, very low negative because it was wildly expected there was going to be some inconsistency with this team. My big thing is the reason why I did list inconsistencies because with the top guys on this team, Tucker DeVries, Lamar Wilkerson, as we said, he's going to be the alpha. Reed Bailey, Connor Enright, those guys, those main guys that are in the starting lineup, and then the few guys that came off the bench. You just can't be inconsistent if you're going to be the top part of this roster, right? And if you're going to win a lot of games, if you're Indiana, you can't afford to have a guy like Tucker DeVries, go quiet for long spurts. You can't have Connor Enright foul out and stuff like that, and you can't have a lot of turnovers as well. But my thing is just inconsistency. That's something obviously that they will fix, and they will be just fine. I think when it comes to when the actual season starts.
Yeah, and we're going to jump into some player breakdowns, kind of based off of a story that I wrote well over a month ago at this point. But before that, quick message from our sponsor, Roback. We'll be right back, but first, we have to talk to you guys about Roback Activewear. There's only one way to describe Roback. Best fit, best feel. For those who aren't familiar with Roback, they're completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. Roback has released so many items within their new licensed game day collection, and it's our favorite. With novel polo designs and clean hoodie and Q-zip designs from some of your favorite schools, including the Indiana Hoosiers, it's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else in the market is pairing these level of custom designs with this quality of activewear. Roback's everyday shorts or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. They're both super comfortable, have an elastic waistband, and great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short look, but the comfort for a day on the move. Roback has also been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with multiple college football stars, past and present, and are becoming the go-to brand for college athletes across the country. Use the code IND20 on roback.com for a generous 20% off for all new customers throughout the end of the week. That's spelled RHOBACK.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with the code IND20. Now back to the rest of this episode of the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast. All right, now let's jump into the player breakdown. I guess so. These rankings came out so long ago. I wrote the story mid-July, so a lot has changed from now and then. So I'm going to start from the bottom. I guess the bottom two, there's not really much to say. Andre Akmovic and Jason Drake, neither guy played in Puerto Rico. Andre is joining the team now, I believe. So not really too much to say unless you guys have any quick thoughts on either of them.
Go ahead, Zach.
I would just say it's interesting. You don't know what you're going to get from those types of guys. Obviously, there's 3 guys that didn't play. If we're going to point all of them out, there's Asimovic, Drake, Jason Drake, and then Nick Dorn. The difference between Nick Dorn and why I'm comfortable and we're comfortable not necessarily putting him in this kind of grouping with Drake and with Asimovic is we all, I think, collectively think that Dorn will be a solid contributor at some point this season when he is fully healthy, whether that's closer to the beginning of the regular season or whether he's able to get some practice time in before then. But I think for all of us, we all kind of view Asimovic and Jason Drake as kind of more developmental guys. Drake, especially with the crowded backcourt, with what we saw from Alex Ristich, what we saw from him in Puerto Rico, I think we're all kind of comfortable putting Drake and Asimovich in that more developmental role for Indiana, at least for this season.
And Drew, if I can remember correctly, your rankings, and we're basing this off the story, so go check this out at Hoosier.com. You kind of rank them based off importance, you feel like, right? And that's kind of how we're going to go with. So that's kind of how when I did my own personal rankings for this team, I'm looking at importance. And I mean, there's really no debate, I don't think, when you look at Andre, he hasn't been there all summer. I know a lot of Indiana fans were really hyped because they were getting a legit 7-footer that was going to come in and stuff. Don't expect much from Andre. I know I do hope to see him in spot minutes, just to see what he's got and what he can bring. But don't expect much from him. And then we mentioned Jason Drake. It's just hard to tell right now. I'm pretty high on Jason Drake as far as a rotation piece, coming off the bench. He's got a lot of dog in him. And I think he can do some really good things based off the film that he's watching or that I've watched of him. So I'm pretty high on him, but right now it's just really hard to, what's he going to bring because he is fighting a lower body injury. We don't know what the extent of that injury is, and obviously he didn't play. So he's definitely, I would say, the wild card of this team right now.
Yeah, and when we say importance, it's not just this season, it's looking past this season too. So there's some guys who will probably have big impacts this year that are lower than guys who might not, just because I was looking at it from a lens of what, Darren DeVries was doing when he came to Indiana and bringing guys in. So that's a big part of it. But next, I guess we kind of went to Nick Dorn, who was number 10, so kind of skipped 11. But Alexa Ristich, the other, Bosnian guard, Kyler, I guess initial thoughts, do you have him a little higher, lower? Where do you kind of have him?
Yeah, so my 13 through 11 right now, just to kind of, where we're at right now, I've got Andre. Are they calling him Alex? Is that what they call him?
I think it's Alex, yeah.
Okay, so Alex Ristich, I had him at 12, and then I had Jason Drake at 11. But I will say with Ristich, man, he was thrown into the fire with this Puerto Rico trip, and that was something that we were all kind of watching to see how much he would play and stuff. And Coach DeVries even said, I threw him out to the fire, and he did well. And he showed some really, really good things. I think the telling sign is that, he was in the game. And I know Connor Enright would have probably been in that spot, I would assume, if he wasn't in foul trouble. But, DeVries was already trusting him to be in those really tough situations down the stretch when Indiana was trying to figure out how to win games. So there's a lot of potential with him, a lot of potential with Ristich. And I'm really, really excited. And I don't fully see him unless Jason Drake is out the full season and stuff. I don't fully see him getting a surefire, spot on the rotation or whatever. It'll just be kind of here and there. But the things that I've seen from him and what he can do, he does look like he can contribute at a pretty good level right now.
Yeah, my 13 through 11 right now, if we're looking at kind of the importance of the roster right now, I have it at Andre Asimovich at 13, Jason Drake at 12, and I have Josh Harris at 11. I already kind of discussed Asimovich and Drake. With Harris, his importance can kind of fluctuate based on how much he is needed throughout the season. Obviously, you have Reed Bailey and Sam Alexis ahead of him at the forward spot. So if you need a guy like Josh Harris to come in and provide minutes, let's say Bailey or Alexis gets into foul trouble, they get injured at some point. At that point, then you'd probably have to kind of slide his importance up. But I think fully healthy, kind of an ideal world where Bailey and Alexis aren't necessarily battling too much foul trouble on a day-to-day or on a game-to-game basis. I don't think we see much Josh Harris this year, and I think he's probably a more developmental guy. I do think there's a lot of potential there. I do think year from now, 2 years from now, wherever it is, I think he will be a good asset for this team, will provide this team good minutes. I just think defensively is where it concerns me for Harris. I think he's got a great offensive bag, can kind of step out 18-ish feet, maybe a little bit further out to the three-point line. I think he's got a good back-to-the-basket kind of game as well. But I think defensively, it's just, can Darren DeVries go out, put him out there, and continue to expect a quality level of defense from him, or is the drop-off from a guy like Reed Bailey and Sam Alexis, is that too steep when you put Josh Harris out there? Can Harris play the 5 by himself? Does he have to play the 4? And then subsequently, does he provide you enough shooting to play the 4 alongside another big man like Reed Bailey or Sam Alexis? So right now I have Harris at 11, although there's a little bit of a caveat just because I think due to importance, foul trouble, injuries, whatever, he might be necessary at some point to get a handful of quality rotation minutes throughout the season.
Yeah, I mean, when I started writing this story, I had Harris as high as I think 5 or 6, But then, seeing what was coming out of practices and now seeing the Puerto Rico trip, I think I had him down at 9. But again, it's, one of those things moving forward. I think he's going to be a huge part. As a freshman, he played a big role at North Florida. He's proven he can, play Division I basketball, and like score, rebound, do that stuff. But it seems like he's going to be more of a developmental piece and someone who, this year probably won't play the biggest role, but moving forward is going to be a key piece for Indiana. So, this year, importance-wise, probably towards the bottom, but moving forward, he's going to be a key piece.
Yeah, and I'll just add with him, a lot of potential with Harris, right? And I'm pretty high on him as well. But totally agree with you guys. The developmental piece, he'll fit in where he needs to fit in. A lot of those times, they don't have the deepest front court, right? For Indiana, that's a common fact. So there's going to be times where they have to look to him to, go out there and contribute defensively. He's very, very suspect on that end right now. That's an area that he's got to work on, but his athleticism, his bounce, where he plays, around the basket and stuff, and he's a pretty good rebounder as well. So there's a lot to like with Josh Harrison. I'm looking forward from a year from now to see what kind of player he is.
Yeah, and I'll throw in. I just got one more quick thing, Drew. I think it is kind of telling that Josh Harris is the only guy outside of Ian Stevens, the only kind of main scholarship guy that didn't play in that third game. So I think that is kind of a little bit telling, at least where he stands from a rotation standpoint.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if anything was up with him not playing. So kind of questioned. I saw that and was really confused about that. So it's something to, I guess, monitor moving forward. But a guy you brought up earlier is I had him just below Josh Harris, mainly because of I thought Harris's impact for the future. But Nick Dorn, he's a guy at Elon. We saw he can score at a high level. Had a big game against UNC last season. Like someone, a proven scorer, someone who we didn't see play in Puerto Rico, but his role could, it could vary. I could see him being one of the, big scorers on this team. I could also see him being kind of an end the bench guy, but he's someone who's going to be in the program past this year. So he will have an impact where it's this year or next year for Indiana. Zach, I know you're high on him. Do you want to just, tell why you're so high on Nick Dorn?
Yeah, if you've been with us for, a week at this point, if you've just seen any of our stuff or any of my stuff related to the team, I'm very high on Nick Dorn. I think that when he does come back from injury, I think he will probably be a 6th, 7th guy not in the rotation, but kind of first or second guy off the bench. I think he's got that kind of scoring punch. The thing with Dorn, and it's similar to Harris, and it's really how you kind of earn minutes as a younger guy. Dorn's still really young himself, is defensively. Can he be trusted defensively? Can Darren DeVries trust him to go out there and guard his position and at least not be a liability, at least not be a guy that the opposing team can just put on an island and go at and score or get fouled every time down the floor? Because the offense is going to be there for Dorn. He's got guard-like skills. He's a matchup issue, especially in a team like Indiana where he could probably guard up and play the 4 if that defense comes around a little bit. And if he's playing the 4, he's probably going to be able to be quicker and drive past whoever's guarding him. Then if you slide him down a little bit, he's playing the 2, maybe the 3. He's probably going to be a little bit bigger, slightly stronger than whoever's guarding him, especially if it's a smaller 2 guard. So I think Dorn kind of provides that versatility that Darren DeVries wants and Darren DeVries needs in this kind of lineup. And the three-point shooting's there. The volume was there. He shot 35% from 3 on 8.4 attempts per game last season at Elon. So I think that kind of speaks for itself. Not only is the percentage relatively decent, 35%, I think he'll take that any day of the week, but on 8.4 3-point attempts per game as well. I think the three-point shooting's there. It's just the length, the size, the ability to kind of just put the ball on the floor, but also doing that at 6'7" and nearly 200 pounds. He's kind of like a slimmer, slightly shorter version of Trent Sisley with a little bit more of an advanced three-point game at this point in his career. But I think Dorn, as we all know, I'm very high on Nick Dorn.
If you need anybody to sell you on Nick Dorn, Zach Browning is your guy. That was spot on. Round of applause for that. But Nick Dorn, obviously I wish he would have played in Puerto Rico, and Zach nailed everything about what kind of player Nick Dorn is. So I'm not even really going to go into that. My question is, I'm sure we're about to get to this guy as well, and Zach kind of mentioned him, Trent Sisley. Yeah. I feel like him and Nick Dorn might be fighting for the same type of spot in a certain way. Now, Trent Sisley can play the 4 a little bit better than I think what Nick Dorn can play. So I think, if DeVries has to throw him into a power forward situation, Trent Sisley can't do that. That was his natural spot in high school before he got to Montverde Academy. So I'm not worried about that. But I do kind of worry, if there's an injury situation with Dorn where he's going to be out an extended period of time, which I don't think is the case, you feel pretty comfortable that Trent Sisley can kind of fill that spot in the rotation, right? But I do question it because, it really could come down to, that seventh guy, that sixth or seventh guy with Trent Sisley and Nick Dorn. Like, who do you prefer out there and stuff? Because we talk about 3-point shooting, and I know it wasn't a high volume, but I think Trent Sisley, he missed like maybe 1 or 2 threes or whatever. I don't know off the top of my head what
60%.
60, yeah, which was great for Trent. A guy that, has just now really started to really show his improvement from behind the arc, the past 2 years that he's really been working on that. So it is curious. I do think that's kind of the fun little battle down there, deeper into the rotation, with Nick Dorn and Trent Sisley, just kind of seeing where you're at on that. But I do like the potential with Nick Dorn. I like the potential with a lot of guys, so I'm obviously going to mention that. But Nick Dorn, as far as potential wise, a year from now, I think he's going to be a major, major piece on this roster.
Yeah, for me, Trent Sisley was probably one of the 2 biggest risers I kind of had from this Puerto Rico trip, guys. Coming into this trip, I wasn't sure, was Sisley going to be, end of the bench guy? Was he going to find his way on the floor? We heard Tate and Connerway praise his ability, to make plays above the rim, as a rim runner, as a cutter. And it was like, oh, maybe Trent Sisley's going to have a role. And then Trent Sisley was awesome in Puerto Rico. The final game wasn't his best, but the first 2 games he was really good. And I think he's, establishing himself as someone who can, play as a freshman for Indiana, especially as it seems like he might have surpassed Josh Harris for that 4 spot. Kyler, you've seen him play since, the start of his high school career. It seems like that Montverde, transferring to Montverde has done wonders for him as a player. And he's taken that next step in just a year. And it's really big for Indiana.
There's a lot of players, in the state of Indiana that are Division I prospects. You can say, they leave the state of Indiana to go to a prep school because they think that, obviously that's the route that they need to go to improve their game. And a lot of times those players get questioned about it. Like, why would you leave the state of Indiana? And I get it. I'm a diehard Indiana, state of Indiana high school basketball fan. I love, what we are. We are the basketball state. But Trent Sisley going to Montverde Academy, that was the best decision that guy could have ever made. And it really showed. And he went there and he really worked his butt off to really improve his, his size. He looks a lot stronger than what he was before he went there. And, just with Trent Sisley, it was questionable, like where's he going to fit in there, everything. But, when Indiana got deeper into the summer, the workouts and stuff, you started hearing things about Trent Sisley, a guy that came in. I think Coach DeVries even said it. He doesn't look like a freshman when he came in. The way he was playing, he was not intimidated by the older guys because there's a lot of older guys on this Indiana team. Not intimidated with the speed of the game or whatever. Yeah, he's going to have some freshman lapses, and you saw that in the 3rd game and stuff. That's totally forgivable for a guy like Trent Sisley. But I'm telling you right now, Trent Sisley is going to play on this team. Yeah. He's going to be a good piece off the bench, and he's going to be one of the more advanced freshmen. And dare I even say it, in the Big Ten. I think he's going to really, really surprise some people at a national level as well. So Trent Sisley is going to be a very, very special talent for Indiana. I don't really worry about, unless there's just pure chaos, I don't worry about him transferring down the road or anything like that. I think he has a chance to be a really, really special player for Indiana, and he's definitely going to be a guy, an in-state guy that all the fans are really going to rally against and want him to see do super, super well in this program.
Yeah, I mean, I originally had Sisley this high. It's not when I originally wrote the story, it was before all this stuff came out. It was, before we heard from players talking about him. It was for him as a future. And I think it's a now and the future thing for Sisley. But from one stock riser to the next, I think this might be the biggest stock riser from the trip, in my opinion. Sam Alexis. I was not sure what to expect from him. He didn't really play. Like, he was, towards the bottom of the rotation for Florida. Didn't really play in their run to the NCAA championship. But Sam Alexis was awesome. Probably the most consistent player on the floor for Indiana. Was the leading rebounder, averaged 12, little over 12 and a half a game, 7.7 rebounds per game. Shot the ball well from the field. Just everything you want from an experienced big. And when Indiana, needs bigs, and he's not, a true center, but there was a lot to like from Sam Alexis in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, and I think when you go down and just look at this Indiana roster from a bird's eye perspective, top down, you look at this Indiana roster, it's obvious what this team kind of lacks. It's size, it's rebounding, it's interior defense, and that's exactly what Sam Alexis does, and he does do it the best of any guy on this roster. And I think that's why I have him so high on my list. If we're talking our rankings 1 through 13, I have him all the way up at 5. I have him higher than Reed Bailey on my list. I'll admit that, and I think it's just because he does what nobody else on this roster can really do. There's nobody on this roster that can rebound like him. There's nobody that on this roster that can protect the basket like him. There's nobody that can do both of those things and combine it with 12.7 points per game like him. So I think it's just kind of the unique traits that he brings to this roster. Again, he's only listed at 6'9". He's not a true 7-footer. But if you point to the best rebounder and the best interior defender on this roster, you're pointing at Sam Alexis. And I think that's where his value comes from. And I think that's where his importance comes from. I think there probably will be nights, not even probably, there definitely will be nights this year where Reed Bailey probably gets the start, but Sam Alexis plays more minutes than him because he's that valuable and that important from a rebounding and an interior defense perspective. I'm very high on Alexis, and I think he showed a lot in Puerto Rico. Again, just 3 exhibition games, but I think from what we saw, he showed a lot.
Yeah, I agree, Zach. I've got him at number 5 as well. I don't have him ahead of Reed Bailey just yet because I was looking more as the importance part of it, for this team to be successful. But, other than Trent Sisley, for me, Sam Alexis is definitely the biggest stock riser there. Zach nailed it. He's everything that you want or not necessarily that you want, but like anything that this team needs, in a post, situation and stuff. That's what Sam Alexis can bring in. I like the idea of him, being a guy that can play alongside Reed Bailey. I would like to see those lineups a little bit better and stuff. But, I think Indiana's got a really, dare I say, a diamond in the rough, with Sam Alexis, a guy that's, been on a national championship team. He knows what it takes to win at a high level. So he's going to bring a lot of leadership, not only in the front court, but just within this team. And man, just the way that he played all 3 games, he looks like he's going to be really, really important for this Indiana team.
Yeah, and it's, someone who has that leadership, that experience, that, championship experience, and that's going to be really big for Indiana. Next up, going to go to Connor Enright, the transfer from DePaul. Enright, wasn't his best performance in Puerto Rico. We mentioned last week we were kind of concerned about the jump shot, how that was going to be. We failed to mention, he was recovering from the offseason shoulder injury, which that's on us. We should have brought that up. But at the same time, though, we were concerned about the jump shot after the surgery. That was kind of the big thing. He was 1 for 5 from 3, which, the volume, Zach, you mentioned the different basketball. I'm taking that with a grain of salt. I'm not worried. His jump shot, you look at the form, it's, a good form jump shot. But again, you just want to see it translate to the floor. But him knowing Darren DeVries' system, being, a disruptor on the defensive end, he did foul out in I want to say 2 games. So that is, again, another one, a little concern. But again, it's August. Connor Enright knows the system. He's someone Darren DeVries clearly trusts. Indiana fans, we saw the viral video of him, slipping on the transition 3 from Lamar Wilkerson. Like, he's going to be someone that's going to die for loose balls. I don't want to make that comparison to someone, but it's kind of similar to an Anthony Leal type of player energy wise, where he's just going to be in the right spots so often. And, it wasn't his best performance. I will be the first one to say that in Puerto Rico. But again, the things he does for Indiana, the biggest things aren't going to be, counting stats. It's not going to he's not going to fill the stat sheet like Lamar Wilkerson or Tucker DeVries, but he could make just as big of an impact with the way he plays on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, and I have Enright actually ranked higher than even Sam Alexis. I have Enright ranked number 4 as far as importance, and it's because of a similar kind of way to Alexis. He provides something that really Indiana doesn't have a ton of, because he's not necessarily the alpha that's going to go score 25 points. I think he could probably go get you 15 to 20 on any given night if you really needed him to, but I don't think that's Enright's game, and Enright knows that's not his game. He's a guy that's going to be out there. He's going to guard the opposing team's best player on the perimeter. He's going to get you 3-4 steals. He's going to get you 4 or 5 assists. And I think the biggest thing for him is just that 3-point shot. We talked about it. And I think the reason I have him listed so high is because of how you need him to be good. Indiana needs him to be good. You can't have a guy out there that's going to play alongside Tate Conaway and not hit the three-point shot. I think he will hit the three-point shot this year. I think especially if they're catch and shoot threes and not necessarily off the dribble, high degree of difficulty threes. I think Indiana needs him to be a guy that they can go and get 8 points from, but get those 4 or 5 assists. He can go get 6, 7 rebounds. He can guard the opposing team's best player for 20, 25 plus minutes a night. I think you'll really see that in a matchup like against Purdue when you've got Braden Smith. And I think what we saw with this week in Puerto Rico was the importance of Enright as a backcourt partner to Tate Conaway, because Conaway, he's a great defender, but you have to be able to take some of the things off the plate of Conaway defensively, because Conaway, you need him to run the offense. He's the primary ball handler. You need him to kind of be able to marshal the offense, get the ball where it needs to go, run the ball in transition and stuff like that. So I think if Enright is able to relieve some of those extra duties that Conaway otherwise might have to handle, like last year at Troy, Conaway was asked to do pretty much everything offensively and be the best guy defensively as well. So I think if Enright can take some of those things off the plate of Conaway, both offensively and defensively, as a playmaker, as a shooter, as a scorer, and then as a defender as well, I think that's where his importance comes from. And then obviously the energy is another thing. And I think that's part of what I was talking about earlier with the foul trouble. His energy, the vocal energy is great and everything like that. He's still valuable when he's on the bench fouled out. But he is so much more valuable when he's actually on the court, when he's able to dive for a loose ball, when he's able to get up and scream in another player's face after drawing a foul. That is where his value lies. And I think that's why he's so important to this team throughout the season.
Zach was spot on with that. So I'll add one quick thing. Look, I'm not looking for Connor Enright to be an offensive juggernaut on this team. I think Indiana's pretty set when it comes offensively, with, Lamar Wilkerson, Tucker DeVries, those guys. I think they're pretty much well set. I just want to see him be one of the best defenders in the Big Ten. A guy like Zach just mentioned, take pressure off of Tate Conaway on the defensive end and let Tate Conaway, not saying focus primarily on offense, but to be a guy that can be the head of the snake for this team. I like the lineup. I didn't know if I would or not, but I do like the combination of Enright and Conaway together. I think with the both of those guys playing along with each other, it takes pressure off of each one of them, allows them to open up their game just a little bit more. But if Connor Enright, if he's bringing energy on the defensive end, if he's making those little hustle plays and he's just being electric, for a full 40 minutes or however long that he's in the game, I think that's more than enough than what this Indiana team needs.
Yeah, and he's a guy who just makes the right play. Like, you have him and Connor Enright and Tate Conaway pushing the ball in transition. I think Indiana's going to do that a lot this year, especially with the shooters around those two. And I think that's going to be a big part of the offense this year. But moving on to the next guy on the list, someone who really didn't have the best performance in Puerto Rico, someone who I was really high on coming into, to the trip and, might have dropped a little, but still I think is going to play a big role in this team is Josiah Miles. Obviously not the best shooting performance from him. Really struggled to shoot the ball, but we saw the rebounding from him in game 2 with 8 rebounds, and that's going to be, I think, a big thing for him. But Kyler, I guess what are your kind of thoughts on Josiah Miles after the trip and heading into the season?
Yeah, and this may be a little harsh to say, and I don't mean it to come off this way, but maybe the more disappointing performance I think that we saw out of all the players that, we had high hopes on. There was obviously going to be that. There was going to be players that we didn't have high hopes for to really show out and stuff. But I think when you look at on the other end, 3.3 points, 23% field goal shooting, the 4-point rebounds is pretty impressive. But it was a little worrisome to see that and stuff. I'm still pretty high on Josiah Miles. I think he's going to still be the sixth man of this team. There's a lot of upside with him and a lot of things that he can do on the floor shooting wise. He's going to have better shooting performances than what he showed in Puerto Rico and stuff. But it is a little, kind of head scratching and stuff, because I think you expect him to be a little bit more, a little bit more important, I guess, on the floor and stuff. But I still think, long term and stuff, I think he's going to be a very, very valuable piece for Indiana.
Yeah, I agree with Kyler. I'm going to withhold pretty much most of my judgment here just because we don't really know. I mean, heading into the trip, I would have told you, 6th, 7th guy in the rotation, the first or second guy off the bench. But we just didn't really see that from him. There was a point, and I think, again, we've talked about it with a lot of even some of the younger guys. It's the defense for me. There was a point where we were following along on social media. There was a point where Miles checked in got beat for an and one, and checked out 30 seconds later. So, I mean, that kind of tells me all I need to know from what Darren DeVries is thinking in an important game against Mega Superbet. I mean, important with an asterisk, obviously. But in a game against Mega Superbet, you come in off the bench, immediately get beat, give up an and one, and you head back to the bench. I think that's kind of shows me that defense has maybe been a little bit of an issue for Miles, and it's something that DeVries is watching closely with him. I think the offensive game is there. I'm not concerned with the shooting at all. I think Miles is a great shooter. I think he will be a great shooter for Indiana, but it's defensively. In the Big Ten, you can't afford to have that drop-off defensively, especially when we're looking at how good the starting lineup could be defensively with Conaway, with Enright, with Wilkerson, DeVries, and one of Bailey or Alexis, whoever it is. That starting lineup, that kind of top six figures to be so good defensively, you can't really afford to kind of have that drop off tremendously when you bring in some of the bench guys and some of the rotation guys. So Miles, I'm going to withhold pretty much most judgment. I don't want to call him out on the disappointing trip, I guess you could call it, too early, but defense is where I've circled for Josiah Miles.
Yeah, I mean, especially with Indiana being undersized to the center position, the wing defenders are going to play a huge role. And it seems like Darren DeVries, you mentioned it, you pulled him out immediately. It seems to be a point of emphasis for him. So definitely something to watch as we kind of move forward into the start of the season in just a couple months. Next, though, the center, or I guess center in quotes, because it's, he's kind of an in-betweener, 4-5, Reed Bailey. He did what you kind of expected from him. The scoring wasn't, the best, and the efficiency outside of the first game wasn't, again, the best. But it was kind of just playing his role, and it seems like we kind of all thought Reed Bailey is a complementary piece, but someone who can score, in bunches for Indiana. But I think for him, the biggest thing, or I guess for this team, the biggest thing from him is his ability to space the floor. Indiana's going to be undersized. But how does he space the floor? Is he making opposing centers guard him on the perimeter? Because if he is, that's going to be so important for the offense and the overall spacing Indiana's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, spot on, Drew. But yeah, Reed Bailey, I have him still in my my top three as far as importance for this team, because he's going to be very, very important. He's going to be the starter, for this Indiana team in the front court, and he's going to be relied on to be that guy a lot of times in the front court. And even though he is undersized and stuff, but you mentioned it, it's his ability to stretch the floor. I think that's really, really key, because it's going to keep those post defenders really honest. They're going to have to go out there and have to guard Reed Bailey and stuff. But 7.7 points, 6.7 rebounds, I think you take that. With Reed Bailey right now, I think you're going to see him probably average at least above 10 points per game, when the season officially gets going and stuff. But if he can be a guy that's a willing rebounder, and he can be a guy that can stretch the floor and knock down the three, at a consistent rate, I think he'll be just fine for this Indiana team.
Reed Bailey is another one of those guys kind of along the lines of Josiah Miles for me. I was slightly disappointed, slightly concerned. Again, it's 3 games in August, not really concerned. But if I had to choose somebody that didn't stand out to me, it probably would be Reed Bailey, just because he's the only guy on the roster that didn't take a three-pointer first off, which is not what I was looking to see. I wanted to kind of see him take those threes, whether they went in or not. I wanted to see him actually be willing to take those threes. He didn't take any threes. The rebounding was good. But when you look at the games and you look at them by a game-by-game breakdown, he was good against the Puerto Rican All-Stars, 10 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists. But he was the biggest player on the floor in that game. Then you look against Mega Superbet, 8 points, 5 points. It wasn't the same impact he had against those taller, those longer defenders. And Reed Bailey, he's not a big bruiser inside. He's not somebody that's going to go down low and kind of just mix it up with some big men in the paint. But the Mega Superbet guys, they weren't 6'11", 300 pounds, 6'11", 250. Those were skinnier, taller, slimmer types of guys, kind of along the lines of Reed Bailey. And I think he kind of struggled with the length a little bit of some of those guys. And that's where my concern kind of lies. When you get into the Big Ten, when you're going up against Oscar Clough of Purdue, just to bring a guy off the top of my head, some of those bigger guys, the Michigans of the world, you have to be able, the Illinois of the world, you have to be able to go up against guys that are bigger and taller than you if you're 6'9", like Reed Bailey. So I think there was some slight concern there just with the way he handled the length and the height of Mega Superbet. But again, it's still early. I have Bailey right now ranked 6 on my importance list, right behind Alexis, just because of what Alexis does from a rim protecting and rebounding standpoint. But I think Bailey will be a solid contributor. I think that 3-point shot, is he willing to take it? And I think how he deals with length will be telling for how impactful he can be this season.
Yeah, and
I got one quick question to ask. I just want to get your guys' quick answer on this. Do you see a world once the season gets started and stuff where Sam Alexis starts over Reed Bailey?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying I think that's going to happen, but if Alexis builds on what we saw in Puerto Rico and Reed Bailey kind of stays in that similar, ballpark, I definitely could see that happening. But Indiana's already so undersized. Darren DeVries might not want to really go away from Bailey, who is the tallest player in the team, or tallest, I guess, non-freshman on the team. So I see both sides of the argument. I'm not expecting it to happen, but I wouldn't be shocked.
I agree with Drew. I could see it happen. I don't think we will see it happen. I think we're much more likely to see Bailey continue to start, but I think we're much more likely to see Alexis finish games rather than start games, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do see maybe scenarios in the Big Ten when they go up against the Purdues and the Michigans and stuff like that. So there could be a situation where they maybe need, Sam Alexis to start. I also see a scenario where they start Reed Bailey and Sam Alexis together, just from a starting point of a game. But yeah, it'll be curious to see if that ever happens this season.
Yeah, I mean, especially against maybe in Illinois where they're starting 2 7-footers. So something definitely to watch for. But next up for, I guess, the list I had, Tate Connerway, someone he played pretty well in, Puerto Rico, 13-4-4, good shooting numbers, 50% from three. The volume was pretty low. I think it was just 3 of 6 for the not tournament, but for the trip. But, kind of did what we expected. 6 turnovers in the second game. You obviously want to get that down, but getting to the free throw line was big for him, especially in the third game. Just doing a little bit of everything, on both ends of the court. And it's kind of what you wanted to see from him is kind of the, a Mike Woodson term, head of the snake.
Yes. Tate Connerway was, I think, other than Trent Sisley and Sam Alexis, I think he was by far out of the big three, with him and Tucker DeVries and Lamar Wilkerson. I think he was the most impressive to me personally, just what he was doing on the floor and stuff. And his offensive game was opening up. I thought he did a pretty good job shooting the ball as well and stuff. But man, he just provides so much on the floor. In the backcourt. I mean, he's so tough, and he's a guy that will pick you up, on the defensive end, pick you up right at half court and everything. But Tate Connerway is going to be really, really special for this team. He's going to run the offense really, really well. And I think he's going to really, really impress a lot of Indiana fans this year.
I want to get your take on my comparison for Tate Connerway real quick, guys. I was bouncing it off and floating out to a couple of the guys that were in Puerto Rico. What do you think about the Ace Baldwin comparison for Tate Connerway? The defense with the offense, maybe not quite as prolific of an offensive player, maybe not a guy that's going to go into Assembly Hall and hit 3 threes and get into it with the student section like we saw Ace Baldwin do this past season. But I think from the ability to impact the game defensively with 4 or 5 steals and then be able to be that head of the snake on the other end of the floor as well, I see some Ace Baldwin there. I can't lie.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't someone, hadn't really thought about it like that, but I do see where you're coming from. Both ends of the floor, might not, he wasn't the most efficient player. The efficiency was there in Puerto Rico, but with, Ace Baldwin never really had the talent around him that Connerway has this year. So it could be a really fun year for Connerway.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't thinking Ace Baldwin, but when you said that's a really interesting one. I think I do agree with that. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of times where Tate Connerway is going to do a lot of things on the floor that is going to really annoy, especially when they're on the road in a hostile environment. There's going to be a lot of things that he does on the floor because he's just so good at what he does, in his position and stuff. There's going to be a lot of things that just really annoy the opposing fan bases and stuff. But yeah, I like that. I think Ace Baldwin was a little bit offensively had a little bit more in his bag than what Tate Connerway has. But as far as a defensive standpoint, I mean, Tate Connerway, I would take him over Ace Baldwin on the defensive side.
All right, let's go to the final two. I'm going to group these two guys together because it seems like, they didn't really have the best shooting performances in Puerto Rico as, a whole. But it's two guys who really saw their impact on, both ends of the court and their ability, to create for others and be unselfish. It's Lamar Wilkerson and Tucker DeVries. Tucker DeVries averaged almost 11 a game with 6 rebounds, 4 assists. The passing, I think, was the biggest highlight from him. Didn't shoot the ball well, under 30 from the field, 22 from 3. And then you have Lamar Wilkerson, 15.7 a game, leading scorer. Zach, you talked a ton about him earlier in the podcast, just about, him as the alpha, and it seems like he's going to be the guy for this team. But Indiana has two guys, I think. Team Conway is another one you could, throw into that category as well. But I think when you look at this team, Tucker DeVries and Lamar Wilkerson are going to be the two de facto leaders on the floor, and two guys Indiana's going to rely on both ends of the court.
Yeah, with DeVries and with Wilkerson, I already talked about Wilkerson a lot, so I'm going to kind of leave that to Kyler if he has any more notes on Wilkerson. But DeVries, I'm not concerned. 11 points, 6.3 rebounds, 4 assists per game. If you map out and you kind of just give him that kind of bonus uptick in efficiency because he wasn't super efficient in Puerto Rico, if you assume he's going to shoot closer to what he has throughout his entire career, which is 50% from the field and around 40% from three, that 10.7 points per game goes up to like 15, 16 points per game. So if you're getting 16, 6, and 4 from Tucker DeVries, I think that's an all Big Ten caliber season, and that's exactly what you want. Also, I'll throw in, he was the one that was primarily guarding the guy that got drafted in the second round on Mega Superbet by the Bucks. He was the guy that drew that primary assignment against Mega Superbet. So I think if you're going to get that kind of impact defensively out of Tucker DeVries too, you'll take that if you're Indiana.
Yeah, I think when you look at both Lamar Wilkerson and Tucker DeVries, it's 1A, 1B when it comes to importance of this team. Lamar Wilkerson, obviously, he's going to be the alpha in a lot of senses. He's going to be probably that guy that's going to be taking the final shot if necessary and everything. But, yeah, we touched on Lamar Wilkerson quite a bit, so obviously I won't go too deep into him. But, yeah, Tucker DeVries, just what he does on the floor, his versatility, and how much production that he brings on the floor. And we've seen that all through his college career. I've mentioned it plenty of times. I think you can argue that he is a top 20, 25 college basketball player this season going into the season. And the reason why he just, as far as transfers and stuff, he wasn't talked about nearly as enough as some of the other ones because it was automatically assumed he was going to follow his dad to Indiana, which he obviously did. But Tucker DeVries, I mean, I think he's going to be so important for this team. And there's going to be a lot of teams that defensively they're going to be, going at Tucker DeVries. That's going to be their number one guy. Lamar Wilkerson, he could shoot his way into bad games. He could just have off nights and stuff. But Tucker DeVries, he's going to be very, very important for this team as far as defending, rebounding, assists, what he brings, what the defense kind of focuses in on with DeVries. Is going to be super, super important. And I think he's going to end up being probably the best player for Indiana this season. And he does have potential to be an all first team, all Big Ten guy.
Yeah. And both guys averaging over 3.5 assists just shows kind of how Indiana wants to play. And that, they want to move the ball. And that's something, I think Indiana fans should be excited about, that their best players are willing, to pass up shots and like create for others. But I think that's all we got, if I'm not mistaken. But next week, guys, we're going to have a football podcast. As Indiana football's back in just a bit. So I think Zach and I are probably going to take the lead on some football stuff, including a football preview, I believe, the week before the season starts. So make sure you guys are tuning in for that. And for all IU athletics, make sure you're following the Hoosier on 3 on X/Twitter. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the Hoosier on YouTube and to the Hoosier on 3 website for exclusive interviews, scouting reports, and access to the message boards where we're posting a bunch of inside recruiting stuff for football and basketball, including stuff from insiders like Joe Tipton, Jamie Shaw, Steve Wiltfong, and many others. So, guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast. We'll be back.